Buenos dias. That's my old Spanish. Good morning, everybody, and good afternoon in another part of the world. Excellencies, distinguished delegates, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our meeting, and we're thankful very much for your participation, especially having in mind this difficult situation with global pandemic. I would like to thank also the UN Economic Commission of Latin America and the Caribbean for hosting this event. For us, it is important. As you all know, even before COVID-19 disrupted lives and our economies, countries faced widespread challenges from cross-border and with corruption, money laundering, and tax abuse. These abuses threaten governments' ability to provide basic goods and services and drain resources from investment in sustainable development, which all states need to achieve the 2030 Agenda. It was the previous normal times that prompted the 74th President of the United Nations General Assembly and the 75th President of the United Nations Economic and Social Council to establish the high-level panel on international financial accountability, transparency, and integrity, so-called FACTI Panel, for achieving the 2030 Agenda, with a view to contributing to the overall efforts undertaken by the UN member states to reach the Sustainable Development Goals. This initiative is even more relevant in the light of the current crisis. That's why in September, the FACTI Panel published its interim report. This report reflects the panel's review and analysis of the gaps, impediments, and vulnerabilities in national and international systems for financial integrity. And we found weaknesses are numerous. First, while there are many international instruments and initiatives, the panel finds that implementation has fallen short. It is critical for states to stand by the international commitments they have made themselves. They need to take concrete actions at the domestic level. Second, we have found that even perfect implementation would not solve all problems. Those who intend abusing tax and financial systems and avoiding rules and regulations would still have pretty possibilities and opportunities to do that in great reward for their efforts. New and creative solutions because of that need to be explored. Third, inadequate global economic governance holds back progress. The panel finds that lack of trust and inclusivity pervades our systems, undermining implementation of existing rules and preventing better rules from being made. Political engagement and political will from governments are needed, both at the national level for embracing reforms that might be politically difficult in some countries, and at the international level for reaching a shared understanding of the challenges and the best ways to resolve them. We need inclusive participation by all nations. The private sector, civil society, and the media also will make a contribution towards these efforts. National social forces combined with political will can bring about ambitious reforms aimed at enhancing financial integrity. This applies equally in all countries, including havens where illicit proceeds are hidden or which allow taxpayers to escape taxation. Excellencies, today virtual regional consultation is the final one in the series we have been already making with Africa, Asia Pacific, and Europe. Now we would like to hear from the leaders of the Americas on their preferred means to address the shortcomings in the existing frameworks. The aim is to help develop political consensus on joint actions by the international community. Issues covered by the panel are numerous, but some might be more pressing than others for the Latin American Caribbean. In our background note, we have raised questions around tax architecture, grand corruption, enablers and abuses, and information exchange. But of course, we would like and we want to hear from you what you think the most pressing concerns are. In your view, what are the three priority areas to enhance financial integrity in the post-COVID world and ensure sufficient financing for response and recovery? No matter the issue you may wish to address, I urge you to bring creative ideas to the table, and we also need open minds to consider lasting solutions which can make a real difference for all of us. Your inputs will feed into the FACTI Panel's determination of technically feasible and politically viable recommendations to be made in our final report, which we hope to publish with your help and support by February 2021. You can also send your ideas in writing to use by the end of this November. I would like also to note that the meeting we are in is being broadcasted live on the United Nations Web TV platform. At this time, I would like to hand over the co-host of the event. Unfortunately, Executive Secretary Alicia Barcena of the United Nations Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean was called to a meeting with the Secretary General at the last minute. And Mr. Daniel Titelman, the ECLAC's Director of Economic Development, will replace her and represent her. So thank you very much for my introduction. And now I would like to welcome Mr. Daniel Titelman, please.
¿Me escuchan? ¿Me ven?
Can you hear me? A very good afternoon. I hope you can hear me. Your Excellencies, distinguished participants, first of all, on behalf of Alicia Barcena, I would like to greet you and apologize for the fact that unfortunately, as you said, she is not able to participate in this meeting as a result of a last-minute commitment. She would have liked to be here, as I say, but she asked me to convey greetings to you. It's a great honor and a privilege for ECLAC to co-sponsor and host this meeting for the FACTI Panel on financial accountability, transparency and integrity to achieve the 2030 Agenda. We think that this last FACTI report provides a significant contribution to the debate on how we can continue to make headway to establish a responsible, transparent environment financially, both within Latin America and globally. We think that this will be crucial if we are to build back better after the COVID pandemic and to ensure the viability and sustainability of our systems. In this regard, the FACTI's report provides a significant contribution to this important debate. Throughout the world, and in particular in Latin America, the crisis brought about by the COVID-19 pandemic has put state policies at the heart of action, and in particular tax policy. That has been a crucial part of how countries have reacted to COVID-19. Tax policy is also being put at the heart of efforts to recover from the economic recession brought about by COVID. In this regard, we in ECLAC believe that tax policy is a crucial part of building back better after COVID-19 to enable us to move towards a development model that no longer depends only on the structures of the past, so that we can reduce inequalities and also to ensure that it is environmentally sustainable. In this regard, tax policy has to be at the heart of our recovery efforts. One of the issues that diminishes states' abilities to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic is, of course, tax evasion and tax avoidance, as well as illicit financial flows. This is a major concern for our region and for countries in our region. we have estimated that 6.1% of our region's GDP is lost as a result of tax evasion. So as the report sets out, reducing tax evasion and avoidance is of critical importance if countries are going to be able to launch tax policies that are able to build back better after the pandemic, and to ensure that we can have more environmentally sustainable societies going forward. Tax evasion and tax abuse has been part of the debate in many countries in the region recently, and it is therefore it is an issue that has been acquiring importance. Nevertheless, there's a great deal still to be done, and that is why we think that events such as this are so important in enabling us to move forward. We are interested in the efforts that are being undertaken by the international community, and we think that the UN can play a very important role in this process. We think the UN should be a crucial part of this tax debate, to contribute to the debate and also to provide support to countries, both at the national, regional and international levels, to combat and avoid tax avoidance and evasion and to avoid illicit financial flows. That is why we're so pleased to be able to take part in this event. And once again, I would like to convey greetings from Ms. Barcena, who unfortunately was not able to take part in this event. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Titelman. And now I would like to go to the high-level segment of speakers. We have them free, and I would like to ask them kindly to stick with the 5 minutes limit if it is possible. So, and now the first one I will ask and invite Dr. Paul Kelly, Minister for National Policies on Nicaragua. Please.
Muy buenas tardes.
A very good afternoon. This meeting is being held at a historic juncture in which we are facing one of the most significant global crises in history as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic that has led to devastating losses and much sorrow for humanity, and that has led to increased unemployment, hunger, poverty, lack of access to healthcare, increased inequality, among other crises that had been assailing humanity even before COVID broke out as a result of an unfair neoliberal system. Financial transparency and integrity, as has been said, the system has many shortcomings. However, when we depend on an interbanking system that is dominated by only one country and that can impose unilateral coercive measures, we can see that this system clearly has shortcomings. We have seen that the rights of people have been violated by those who believe that they are superior to others, and they think that everybody else should bow to their whim without any legal recourse. They act as though they were in charge. All of these problems undermine our ability to achieve our development goals, and they continue the neo-colonialist mentality of the past. We cannot talk about financial accountability and transparency when universal rights continue to be violated in the 21st century. The use of these sanctions, in particular when there's a pandemic going on, should be considered to be a crime against humanity, as it undermines states' capacity to provide healthcare to their citizens. This violates the United Nations Charter and the principles of international law. including Article 7.1K of the Paris Statute. If, as an international community, we do really wish to see a fair, rules-based international order, then we need to replace these unilateralist policies with the established mechanisms. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, Minister. Second speaker, I would like to invite Mr. Cristian Hernandez, Vice Minister of Finance, Venezuela.
¿Se escucha?
Can you hear me? A very good afternoon. On behalf of President Maduro, we would like to warmly greet you. We're very pleased to be able to participate in this important meeting today. As you all know, the pandemic has brought about a significant amount of changes in the world. Venezuela has shown the example of how to deal with the pandemic with scant resources. Given the current international context and following on from what Nicaragua just said, we are faced with an unjust scenario in which Venezuela has been having to deal with significant shortcomings. $30 billion of ours have been illegally seized by some political actors and some political groups who are working against democracy and against our Venezuelan sovereignty. Given this backdrop, the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela has nevertheless been trying to improve its tax mechanisms. To enhance these mechanisms as we try to root out corruption. As a result of this, we have been able to achieve or to make our tax deficit to deal with that thanks to our domestic tax receipts. We do not have access to international financing because we have resources that have been blocked or frozen. As a result, we're in a very delicate situation as a result of all of these unilateralist policies that are being applied against us by some countries. We are therefore victims, in addition to the sanctions, and indeed the breach of these, or the misuse of these sanctions, because this has erected a legal framework in which these sanctions are targeting only the use of one currency and one particular specific financial framework. As a result of all of this, we are not able to access financial markets abroad. It even affects our ability to buy food for our people. And this also impacts our ability to provide healthcare. So, when we talk about corruption or efforts to combat corruption globally, or efforts to achieve sustainable development within the context of the 2030 agenda, we must be very clear about saying that the unilateral measures and sanctions affecting Venezuela and other states clearly undermine our ability to achieve development. They are neo-colonialist policies that harm people and clearly contravene the spirit of the United Nations. They undermine the self-determination of people, and they undermine solidarity between countries. From Venezuela, we are speaking out clearly against these sanctions, and we do hope that this platform and similar international platforms for cooperation can make it crystal clear that this cannot continue, that respect and solidarity are the tools that we have and that we must use to achieve a much more harmonious integration and a much fairer world. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Vice Minister. Your statement is very clear. Now I would like to invite Mr. Ricardo Patron, the General Secretary of STK, Trade Union Confederation of Argentina. So welcome.
Buenas tardes, ¿se escucha? ¿Sí?
Good afternoon. Can you hear me? First of all, I wish to thank you on behalf of the Argentinian trade union movement for the invitation you've extended to me to this panel. From within the union movement, we're committed and have been for a long time to finding a way to put an end to the inequalities which beleaguer our society, particularly in the Argentine Republic. 4 years before the pandemic, we had policies that were making the population poorer. And now, in the midst of the COVID-19 crisis, these same policies are making things all the more difficult. With that in mind, I would say, as I said before, that we're committed to looking for the necessary tools to build a financial and fiscal architecture which is progressive and just in nature, and one which puts an end to tax evasion, tax avoidance, and to harmful, indeed criminal fiscal practices. These harmful criminal practices in the hands of hegemonic economic groups, major undertakings, and their owners mean that it's impossible to ensure sustainable development underpinned by social justice as enshrined in the Sustainable Development Goals set by Agenda 2030 of the United Nations. There is data of which we're aware, but nevertheless which need to be recalled because they have a deep impact on us. 10% of the global GDP, for example, can be found in tax havens or in the form of offshore finance, and that's quite alarming. At a regional level, 6.3% of the regional DP, the RDP, is tax avoidance, tax evasion is equivalent to 6.3% of the GDP at regional level, and sometimes accounts for double what governments spend on education and health. In our country, tax avoidance and evasion account for 5% of our GDP. In Latin America, there are deep-rooted asymmetries in terms of how wealth is distributed, wealth is produced, how wealth is taxed, and within the financial systems. It is vital that we eradicate these asymmetries. We need to have measures in place as a matter of urgency that correct these asymmetries. Moreover, tax breaks placed on major companies and the failure to tax high income mean that states are forced to get into debt to pay for debt service, and they need to get into debt to provide tax relief to these rich people, and that stymies their development in key areas of the economy. Such development, of course, which would allow a decent life for all, and one where social justice was enjoyed, that becomes impossible for these countries. The idea of illicit financial flows is inextricably linked to the economic and productive landscape of a country and its economic geography. Major businesses as a hegemonic group that have oligarchical control over strategic resources, and they harness the advantages of state institutions. They make the most, they squeeze every drop of juice they can out of the state architecture, but there's no notion of exchange to foster a sense of social well-being within their production, or to foster sustainable development in the way they produce. They just take, and take. With all this in mind, we have proposals to bring to the table. Of course, first of all, we agree with the proposal currently underway, moving through the National Congress of Argentina. This is a proposal which would further tax major fortunes. It would apply estate tax to them, and that would allow us to collect a further 1% of GDP. We think that that's a correct proposal because it would pave the way towards a major tax reform in such a way as to ensure the system was progressive. But we can't necessarily only seek permanent change at the moment. In these times of emergency, we need urgent measures, and this estate tax measure to which I referred is one such measure. Of course, it's of urgent importance to tax international financial transactions, both those traditional in nature and those transactions channeled through digital channels as part of e-commerce in new digital currencies. We have to apply tax to those transactions, of course, as well. Better integration of the productive matrix, commercial enterprises, and of technology is important. We need to develop value chains at a domestic level, rely less on imported manufactured goods. And this is part of the change we need because it will iron out these asymmetries to which I referred. Such endeavours would stop financial secrecy being able to flower. We need active policies to ensure that financial transactions don't take place in secret so that everything is fully transparent. We need better systems to ensure that there's proper accountability and that wealth is invested where it needs to be invested. Once again, thank you on behalf of the Argentine trade union movement for inviting us to this panel. On behalf of this union movement, I would say once again that we have a lofty responsibility on our shoulders to help our citizens emerge from crisis, and that responsibility involves us ushering in financial and tax reform to put an end to tax evasion, tax avoidance, and to ultimately end up with the society we wish to see, and that is the one where there is no social inequality. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, and I'm happy to hear that professional unions are so active and pressing government to do the job. Very good. Thank you. Now we are starting general discussion, and I would like to invite the panel members to intervene. Up to 3 minutes, please, colleagues. And I would like to invite, if you want to speak, of course, I would like to invite now the first, Jose Antonio Ocampo, please.
Many thanks indeed. I'm delighted to be at this panel. I wish to thank you, all of you who've supported the work of the panel. I just wish to briefly sum up the conclusions of the work underway in the tax field. That is the work underway on the part of the panel. The first idea we openly discussed was the fact that we do need to continue supporting improvements underway that are in line with the OECD framework, but at the same time, we need to work on a much more representative mechanism which is intergovernmental in nature, and we believe that cooperation on tax matters must therefore be put in the hands of the United Nations in the medium term, and this through an intergovernmental panel working on tax matters and tax cooperations. We have work underway within the inclusive framework of the OECD, as I stated, and where that's concerned, we support the idea of having a simple system one which would guarantee that taxes were paid in the place where the economic activity genuinely takes place. And we need to ensure that benefits are transferred away from tax havens and that we put an end to tax evasion. As proposed by the OECD, well, we would agree with what the OECD proposed, but we don't agree with the idea that residual utilities are taxed in developing countries, and multinationals have those things taxed in developing countries, but not in all of the countries where activity takes place. Within our reform, we must include capital gains that are often exempt from taxation or only pay very low taxes. We need to focus on that, and we need to look also at the problem of misinvoicing and the misquoting of taxable income. In terms of reporting, we propose that there be an automatic exchange of information between fiscal authorities. Country reports have to be produced by multinational countries on each of the countries in which work is conducted, and that needs to be more rigorous. All activity in all countries needs to be reported on and taxed, not just that above a certain threshold. There needs to be a global entity looking at reshaping the financial system that could be put in place put in the hands of the United Nations or maybe the OECD. But there does need to be a unified system, because information and the exchange thereof is hindered by the fact that all our tax systems and our tax cooperation systems are fragmented in nature and rather piecemeal. The panel supports the idea of having a global assets register. And this would contain information on end beneficiaries, the end owners of these assets. Such information is vital for the work that we carry out. Now, in terms of dispute settlement, tax authorities at an international level state that they're not in agreement with arbitration mechanisms, and we agree with that. We say that you need to create a new mechanism which could be linked to or under the purview of the United Nations, under the purview of the Committee on International Cooperation in Tax Matters, for example. Many thanks indeed.
Thank you very much. Now I would like to invite the Manorma Sokenandan, Deputy Secretary General of CARICOM and the FACTI Panel member. Please, Manorma.
Thank you very much, and I hope you can hear me. Distinguished chairs, honorable ministers, other representatives from the Caribbean and Latin America, good afternoon, buenos dias, goedemiddag. It is for me quite an honor to be part of this August gathering, albeit virtually. You have been informed and you have read about the establishment of the high-level UN FACTI panel. We have 3 clusters, public reporting, tax cooperation, international cooperation, and dispute settlement. You have read, hopefully, about its purpose and its mandate. And I really hope that you have been through the interim report. Speaking from the Caribbean perspective, being small, developing, vulnerable countries with a history of being an easy target for the developed countries, I would like to mention a few characteristics and then come with a few proposals. We are quite familiar with unilaterally being cut off from certain financial and technical assistance because we are not signing on to agreements, or it is late when we sign. We can all hopefully recall the issues with not or delayed signing of the ship rider agreement, while nothing is done on the demand side. Issues in relation to the preferential treatment subsidies, But you still have developed countries who do provide subsidies in all sorts of hidden forms. The issues about sugar, banana, travel tax. Certain small developing vulnerable countries have been upgraded to middle income and high income countries, and they're being unilaterally deprived from IDP funding. And now we have the issues about the tax havens, tax evasion, financial secrecy, financial transparency, blacklisting, anti-corruption, international cooperation. It's a lot. The biggest question is who bears the brunt of the burden? We've had COVID-19, it's mentioned several times. And again, the Caribbean got burned. Because yes, we have hurricanes, we have earthquakes, but in the middle of COVID-19, 3 of our countries got gray listed. So COVID was not enough. And the situation clearly indicates, when we're talking about international cooperation, that is an issue of trust. Now, how do you trust a partner if in the middle of COVID, you're being gray listed? What about goodwill, right? And there is certainly no evidence that the EU or the OECD, they are showing any goodwill, right? Or any cooperation efforts towards the Caribbean. Because none of their own members have ever been black or gray listed. And look at the population size, their scale of economy, the billions or trillions being lost due to tax avoidance, evasion, anti-corruption, etc. But on the other hand, at least I cannot recall having heard that any Caribbean country invested in Europe and paid bribes or bribes, etc. The question is, what are OECD countries, EU countries doing on the demand side in relation to their investors, multinational, transnational companies originating from within the membership of the OECD and operating in the developing countries? What about those companies investing in our region, especially, for example, in the tourism sector or in the extractive industries? These companies, they always have reasons why they should not be paying taxes or why they should be receiving privileges. I think the time has come that these economic actors must pay taxes in the countries where they are conducting de facto economic activities. Last week, for example, Barbados informed us in another gathering that they had passed 15 pieces of legislation in 1 year. But they still got gray listed with the Bahamas and Jamaica. It means then that these countries may face economic sanctions from institutions like the IMF and the World Bank, and also experience adverse effects on trade. Research and data has shown that it is not the small entrepreneur or the average citizen that is involved in the bright, highly sophisticated financial and tax webs. It is the powerful rich, big corporations, law firms, accountants, the highly sophisticated professional service providers, as I would call them, and the politicians. The average poor citizens have to fill out all forms, have to bear all the costs, and have to carry the financial burden to conduct financial transactions. Conducting financial transactions in the Caribbean is very expensive. There is enough data. Unfortunately, there is this custom in keeping data secret. In the report, mention is made of international cooperation and settling disputes. I will give you a clear example how even when it comes to legally binding decisions, the big ones get away. Recall Antigua and Barbuda's case in the WTO in 2003 against the United States. Antigua won the case and the US had to pay Antigua $21 million annually, right? It was a case in relation to gambling, etc. But when Hurricane Irma hit Barbuda in 2018, 15 years later, Antigua had to send a special envoy to Washington to plead for US payout. By that time, $315 million, which is 25% of Antigua's GDP, but less than 1/10% of the US economy. Conclusion, It cannot be one size fits all. It certainly is not for the OECD or the EU countries. Small, vulnerable developing countries, small populations with no economic diversity, small-scale economies, heavily dependent on capacity input, on investment, access to innovative technology, and certainly we do not own the technology. We need training, advocacy to sensitize and making the developed countries, its politicians, and powerful cost the Caribbean taxpayers also a lot of money. Question arises if we should remain operating in the OECD context. I do not think so. We need the multilateral umbrella whereby the voices of the developing countries count and can be heard. We need simple, transparent systems, and we need the civil society with us. And I think we in the Caribbean, we have to deal and implement those global standards that are directly, immediately beneficial to us in the Caribbean, such as public procurement, public registration, declaration of assets, international cooperation. Bear in mind, we are not saying that we should not adhere to global standards, but we have to put and we have to be part of the negotiations, and our voices have to be heard. And when standards, etc., agreements are being made and we agree to certain things, the Caribbean they must be part of it. Okay. So, and I really hope that later on in this session, we will also hear from our member states. That's why we're having the session, because we need your input and we need your thought process so that we can improve, upgrade our interim report, which has to be presented next year to the UN. Thank you very much.
Thank you. The third member of FACTI from the region will be Magdalena Sepulveda, Executive Director of the Global Initiative for Economic, Social and Cultural Rights, and also FACTI member. So please, Magdalena.
Many thanks indeed. A very good afternoon to you all. I wish to follow on in the vein of the presentations made by other members of the FACTI panel, giving a backdrop to the interim report. The report was presented during the worst healthcare, human, economic and social crisis that the world has faced in this century, and one which has wreaked havoc across the region. We've heard from the distinguished delegates of Nicaragua, Argentina and Venezuela regarding the devastating impact of the COVID-19 pandemic. And indeed, that impact has been felt across the region. What's at stake at the moment is whether or not that we'll fulfill the SDGs, but whether we can make tangible improvements to social well-being, social cohesion, and whether we can avoid inequalities further growing in the region, because these inequalities widen gender gaps, for example, which need to be closed. And we also need to narrow inequalities to ensure that human rights are upheld, such as right to education, healthcare, and social protection. Of course, there are everyday challenges that arise within fiscal policy to fulfill the SDGs. But in addition to these, now we need to have financial policies which allow us to deal with the COVID recovery. We've seen the economy contract by 0.3% in the region. We've got unemployment at 11%. And that means that 11.6 million more people are now unemployed across the region than before. We've seen an increase in poverty, which will soon stand at 28.7 million more people than the year before. We've seen abject poverty rise, 19.15 million more people will be in abject poverty than were before. So now, in total, we've got something like 33 million, if not more, people in poverty, and that's 13.5% of the region's population. We have this huge, colossal crisis, and that means that the FACTI panel needs to work side by side with regional stakeholders, and for that region, FACTI's held a series of consultations across various regions, and we're currently here at the Latin American and Caribbean regional consultation, which is the last of the series. This panel is very important, and it's important that we work together with governments, civil society organizations, and all other strata to ensure that we come to the table with progressive recommendations, progressive policy proposals, but also ones which are politically feasible. That the panel needs to strike that balance. We're asking questions unequivocally, with no holds barred in the face of the crisis, to look at how we can repair the economy, allow its recovery in a way that upholds social well-being. But we can't simply deal with the problems today. There needs to be financial accountability, transparency, integrity across public institutions in the long term so that we can tackle the challenges facing us, be these the environmental crisis that the Earth is facing or the others indeed. I wish now to share with you my thoughts on a number of the main recommendations that have been tackled by our clusters and some of the recommendations that emerge from the report. I just want to touch on these because they are important clusters of issues. We do believe that within the region's current macroeconomic context, which is of course an unfavourable one, there's a high degree of uncertainty. That stands for the whole world indeed. Key cooperation is important. That was said by Mr. Ocampo. But more specifically, international governance and fiscal cooperation are perhaps the most vital forms of cooperation so that we can produce common global solutions, holistic solutions within the region. The interim report of the FACTI panel also talks about how international mechanisms are not inclusive enough. By international mechanisms, we mean the OECD, for example. We say in the report that the UN needs to play a key role, and that is a crucial issue that these consultations could touch upon, and has touched upon indeed. Moreover, we wish to know more about which mechanisms might best foster tax information and financial information exchange to reduce the room for tax avoidance, tax evasion, and to reduce the possibility for illicit financial flows to flow. We heard what was said by the ECLAC representative. He said that the region loses 6.1% of the regional GDP to tax avoidance and evasion and tax avoidance. And that's something tackled by the regional consultation process, and we must continue to work on that. Finally, we need to hear from you in these consultations which policy recommendations or policies might be useful to provide a tax-based response to the growth of the digital economy. Another question would be how developing countries in the region, Latin America and the Caribbean, and this was touched upon by my previous colleague, how these countries could harness greater benefit from the growth of the digital economy to widen their tax base. We eagerly await your thoughts. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now we have about 1 hour with our interpreters together, and we have about 9 people on my list who would like to speak. I would like to ask you to speak about 3-4 minutes to be able to allow everybody to speak. If you have something more to say, we welcome your writing in the written proposals by the end of the November. So please, the first speaker will be Ms. Silvana Corion Ordinola, prosecutor for the Odebrecht case, Peru. Welcome.
Dr. Grabowska, I think we may need to move on at this stage. I'm not sure if she's ready to make an intervention at this time.
Oh, okay.
And also the representative from Antigua is also not able to join at this time. So we would come to...
Antigua is what the name, please?
Dr. Walton Webson has not been able to join.
Also not. Okay. Okay. In that case, we start with Mr. Victor Dos Sorets, President of the International Chamber of Commerce, Argentina, please.
Hola.
Hello, hello. Can you please confirm that you can hear me? Okay, thank you. Perfect. As chair of the International Chamber of Commerce in Argentina, I am honored to share the views of the private sector in my country with you. We've been a pioneer in anti-corruption efforts because we believe that only a system free of corruption is the one that will enable all participants to compete on a level playing field. The global private sector recognizes the vital importance of halting corruption. This has had an immense negative impact on business negotiations in Latin America. While there's not one single solution, the ICC recognizes the crucial role to be played in international fora in mobilizing collective action. If we regularly monitor and genuinely apply the United Nations Anti-Corruption Convention, then it has the potential to create a level playing field where all players have equal opportunities in transparency. The ICC believes that the OECD convention and the UN convention will help deal with corruption both in supply and demand domestically and internationally, but also the misuse of public funds, money laundering, and obstruction of justice. The full implementation of the convention is required to meet these objectives and must be implemented by governments. That's a very necessary step so that we can implement the prevention measures that will be effective. It's even more urgent in this COVID-19 context. Massive economic stimulus is required to safeguard the economies and to create new opportunities and to change behaviors of corruption and unethical behavior. We believe that the convention should be at the heart of international efforts to combat corruption, and to achieve this, one central point to consider would be implementing a better monitoring process. In Argentina, I would just comment that we have a regulatory framework to combat corruption that is the penal code in our country. It criminalizes any corruption, extortion, misuse, mishandling of funds, and money laundering. Greatest compliance with these provisions should be a government priority, as was pointed out by our colleagues on the FACTI panel. We believe that the panel should be promoting public-private cooperation to achieve anti-corruption efforts, anti-corruption and transparency efforts. This is needed both on the government side as well as in the private sector. Moreover, the panel and governments in general should consider the private sector as a strategic partner in promoting these measures and to be a leader in developing tools for integrity, as is outlined in the ICC guidelines. In conclusion, ICC Argentina supports the objectives of the FACTI panel to promote accountability and transparency when it comes to the use of public funds. This is a matter of particular importance, in particular in the COVID-19 context. Governments and businesses need to work together to achieve these objectives, and we must achieve genuine progress. We hope that the FACTI panel will take that into account in the final conclusions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. The next I see Ms. Mireia Valverde Ocon, General Director of the Regulatory Affairs at the Financial Intelligence Unit in Mexico.
Co-chair, can we try to go back to Peru, because I think we've resolved the technical difficulty.
Good. It is Ms. Silvana, probably? Carrion Ordinola? the prosecutor for the Odebrecht case, Peru. Please, yeah, welcome.
Sí. Buenas tardes con todos. ¿Me escucha?
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. Can you hear me? Can you not hear me now? I'm pleased to be with you. Thank you for the invitation to participate in the panel. I just wanted to share some views and some recommendations on impunity as a result of corruption based on my experience in Peru. The Odebrecht case in Peru was a matter of corruption. The interpreter apologizes. The sound is very poor. There was serious abuse of power and systematic violations. It led to a lack of trust in institutions and the government. There was a great deal of economic power. The interpreter apologizes. The sound is too difficult.
Esquema para poder enfrentar este tipo de investigaciones penales de gran corrupción y a la vez imponer sanciones económicas importantes en nuestro país. Para ello, en el Perú se ha creado un subsistema de justicia especializado con una expertise determinada que está conformada por una Corte de Justicia Especial ante la cual se tramitan estos casos de gran corrupción, un equipo especial de fiscales también que investigan estos casos y los abogados del Estado para estos temas patrimoniales, en este caso la Procuraduría a la que represento, creados específicamente para combatir estos casos de gran corrupción de lavajato. Desde la experiencia de nuestra participación en estas investigaciones penales, para hacer un combate efectivo a estos casos de corrupción de esquemas sistemáticos y sofisticados, hay dos instrumentos procesales que han sido importantes para poder hacer esta lucha, este combate contra la corrupción, que son la cooperación y la asistencia judicial internacional y la colaboración eficaz. Este tipo de casos de trascendencia internacional, de redes transnacionales de corrupción, es importante sin duda el apoyo de otros países en los cuales ha trascendido estos esquemas de corrupción y para ello debe existir una firme política de cooperación y asistencia judicial en las investigaciones, la cual debe ser reforzada a través del fortalecimiento de los canales de comunicación y coordinación entre las autoridades de distintos países, que incluyen, debe incluir entre estas autoridades a las unidades de inteligencia financiera, fiscalías, procuradurías, a la policía, bajo un protocolo de actuación conjunta. En el caso de Perú, el mecanismo de la colaboración eficaz o delación premiada está ayudando notablemente en el avance de las investigaciones y la lucha contra la corrupción, permitiendo encontrar un balance entre la información brindada y el resarcimiento económico al Estado, constituyendo un valioso instrumento de lucha contra la corrupción.
The interpreter apologizes, but the sound quality is poor and the speed is such that I am unable to follow.
Por proyectos de infraestructura de gran envergadura, que además también han sido alcanzados por estos esquemas de corrupción, pero que sin embargo, por contar con una inmunidad propia de los organismos internacionales, estos funcionarios no se les puede investigar al interior de los casos penales que nosotros tenemos en nuestro país, por lo cual sería necesario implementar algún mecanismo que permita se le levante esta inmunidad. Respecto a la confiscación de activos sin condena, creemos que deberían potenciarse los esfuerzos de las unidades de inteligencia financiera a efecto de que se realice una constante coordinación entre sus pares a nivel internacional para la oportuna identificación de los activos ilícitos y congelamiento administrativos a efectos que estas medidas permitan ejecutar medidas cautelares en el futuro. Por ejemplo, para el caso Lavajato, aquí en el Perú, existen pedidos de incautación en base a solicitudes de cooperación judicial internacional en el marco de la Convención de las Naciones Unidas. De igual manera, en nuestra legislación se ha incluido desde hace un par de años una ley específica sobre extinción de dominio, que es una herramienta de política criminal independiente y autónoma dirigida a capturar o recuperar el activo en nuestro país hay un sistema especializado también de fiscalías que solamente ve la recuperación de activos, extinción de dominio y juzgados y cortes dedicadas específicamente a ello. Como conclusión, a manera de finalizar mi intervención, podemos entonces concluir que los sistemas especializados para combatir la gran corrupción es lo que se recomienda como experiencia para poder hacer un combate efectivo a los hechos de gran corrupción. Se deben fortalecer los mecanismos procesales de cooperación y asistencia judicial internacional y la colaboración eficaz, articular un protocolo conjunto entre países sobre fiscalías, procuradurías y jueces que puedan compartir esta información y plantear la necesidad de recomendar a los organismos internacionales que puedan incorporar en sus procedimientos mecanismos que permitan levantar la inmunidad a aquellos funcionarios involucrados en los casos de gran corrupción. Muchas gracias.
Okay, muchas gracias. Now, I think we can go to the Ms. Mireia Valverde Ocon, General Director of Regulatory Affairs at the Financial Intelligence Unit, Mexico. Only one request to all, please speak slower because interpreters not catching up. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Intelligence Unit. I want to thank the committee for this invitation and recognize the efforts made in order to organize and make possible this important panel. As stated in FACTI's interim report, addressing gaps and systemic shortcomings requires a basic understanding among all stakeholders. There are no individual measures in order to enhance financial accountability, transparency, and integrity. And each country should understand its own context in order to establish a path to reach a common destination. Bearing this in mind, Mexico recognizes there are still challenges that need to be addressed. However, important progress has been achieved to strengthen the financial accountability, transparency, and integrity systems. Mexico understands that these challenges are systemic and consequently, the solutions must be systemic too. In that sense, the country, through Mexico's Financial Intelligence Unit, has been promoting and reinforcing a close working network that includes supervisory entities such as National Banking and Securities Commission, the private sector through financial institutions and chambers of commerce, academia through signed agreements with universities, among others. For instance, derived from COVID-19 pandemic, Mexico's Financial Intelligence Unit worked closely with the CNBV, the National Banking and Securities Commission, on the development of guidelines and communications whose objective were to prevent and combat financial offenses related to the health crisis. In addition, and in accordance with the interim report, Mexico believes international cooperation is crucial not only for financial accountability and transparency, but for worldwide development as well. Therefore, the country participates in a wide range of international and multilateral forums. And since 2000, Mexico has been a party member of the Financial Action Task Force, but it is also a member of GAFILAT, a cooperating and supporting nation of CFARAF, and an observer of Moneyball. It is also a member of Egmont Group, and just recently, Dr. Nieto has been designated as Vice President of the Group of Experts for the Control of Money Laundering of the Organization of American States. Our participation in these and other groups aims at gathering best practices and success stories around the world to be able to implement them in a country, as well as sharing information and implementing standards which allow effective and efficient operation and prevention of and fighting crimes such as money laundering and terrorist financing, thus promoting sustainable development of countries and the entire world. These participations also allow the country to face emerging risks such as the misuse of financial technology, and the COVID-19 crisis and the illegal activities used by criminal groups to launder money, such as humans, drugs, smuggling, and weapons trafficking. To conclude, as it was stated previously, Mexico is fully aware of the remaining challenges that need to be tackled, but it is committed and willing to continue working towards the achievement of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development through a more comprehensive coordination and a more effective and efficient combat of financial crimes. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Mexico. On my list is Francois Loriot, but I do not see on the list of participants. Peter, do we have him?
I don't think he has been able to join, so yes, we can proceed to the next on the list.
Fine. Next on the list is Mr. Luis Moreno, Tax Justice Coordinator, Latin American Network for Economic and Social Justice, Latindad, Peru. Welcome.
Bien, señora copresidente del panel FACTI.
Madam Co-Chair, Ms. Grybauskaite, Head of the Economic Development Division of ECLAC, participants, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to warmly greet you on behalf of the Latin American Network for Economic and Social Justice. We work to advocate for financial transparency and tax transparency, and we hope to enrich this dialogue by providing some recommendations of our own. The COVID-19 pandemic has exacerbated economic and social inequalities in our region, and it has also deepened inequalities in terms of the job market, gender equality, and access to healthcare. We have also seen significant social protests in our region which had erupted even before the pandemic begun, people clamoring for greater social justice. We're also seeing a climate emergency, and the most vulnerable people are bearing the brunt of the effects of climate change. Hence, having the necessary resources to deal with these crises in the short and medium term is absolutely essential. Huge amounts of resources are lost every year to tax evasion and tax avoidance, and these are resources that cannot be used by the states. This can even be 5% of GDP or even more that is lost, according to OECD estimations, lost to some major corporations. And we're also seeing that the digital economy is having an impact because companies are able to boost their profits without having to declare their incomes necessarily in all of the countries in which they operate. That is why the work of the FACTI panel is so crucial, and there is a colossal task to be tackled. We would therefore like to see the panel recommending the establishment of a universal body and an intergovernmental body to deal with these issues, as this is such an urgent issue. It can't be kicked into the long grass. We must deal with these issues that have been accumulating for so many years. The time to act is now. The panel has stated that the necessary changes need to be undertaken immediately to deal with tax fraud and tax avoidance. We need to close the gaps and the shortcomings that exist in the current system to build a fairer and more responsible system, to boost countries' capacities to engage in cooperation and to deal with all of these issues, and to ensure also that states fulfill their human rights obligations and fulfill gender equality, but not in a self-censorship manner, but rather with a global process, because developing countries have a great deal to contribute. We welcome the level of commitment that has been seen in the preliminary report and the transparency measures that have been proposed. We welcome these measures, which we think are promising, but we also need to see greater attention to the concerns that have been made, for instance, when it comes to investment agreement and the necessary for a fruitful exchange of information between countries. We need to see a fair and transparent international financial system. This should be part and parcel of the panel's recommendations. FACTI must also support the previous high-level recommendations when it comes to tackling illicit financial flows, for instance, in Africa, and the 2019 meeting proposed exhaustive analysis and important recommendations that can and should be applied. For instance, the UNCTAD conference in Africa made some significant steps forward on these issues. These are crucial lessons that must be built upon. Finally, in this context, in which Latin America lacks a permanent panel to discuss these issues, the FACTI panel offers us a degree of hope. However, we need to ensure that the necessary capacities are built up so that at the national and regional level we can tackle these major issues. The panel's success will hinge upon the clarity of its recommendations and the support it can provide to member states to ensure a universal, equal, intergovernmental system under the aegis of the United Nations. This is what we need to combat illicit financial flows. In addition, we need to ensure that we have a vaccine, so to speak, to combat illicit financial flows through the necessary measures that I have outlined. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Vaccine from bad things, always useful. Now, second on my list is Mr. Sergio Chaparro from Colombia. Do we have him?
Sí, muchas gracias, señor.
Okay.
Yes, thank you very much, Madam Coordinator. On behalf of the Center for Economic and Social Rights, we are pleased to have the opportunity to share our opinions about the issues that the FACTI panel has broached in its interim report. We think this is an excellent opportunity for us to deal with these important issues at this crucial time. We think that it's very significant that progress has been made on including a human rights approach within the FACTI panel's work in line with comments that were made in previous rounds of consultations. The economic health and trust crises that state institutions in the region are experiencing are also a human rights crisis. Even though Latin America only has 8% of the global population, Latin America has seen more than 30% of COVID-19 deaths. And the region is also bearing the brunt of the economic impact and is seeing poverty only further exacerbated. This situation cannot be delinked from problems that we are seeing in the international financial architecture. This architecture severely restricts countries' fiscal headroom to deal with COVID-19 and to fulfill their human rights obligations, which can also be extraterritorial obligations. In line with these obligations, states have the duty to ensure that their efforts do not cause predictable harm beyond their borders, nor must they hinder other countries' capacity to fulfill their human rights obligations. Individually and as part of international financial institutions, states have the duty to engage in international cooperation to uphold human rights throughout the world, and in particular in poorer countries. Building on the work of the Initiative for Human Rights Principles in Tax Policy and our work to develop the human rights standards in these tax and financial domains, we would like to make the following 3 comments as by way of recommendations. First of all, as the panel recommends and recognizes, the lower income countries are having to apply standards that were developed without their contribution for the most part. We need to overcome this lack of adequate representation and the power imbalances when it comes to the international financial architecture. That is why we reiterate our support to the G77's call for the UN Tax Expert Committee to become an intergovernmentally financed body. We'd also like to see the adoption of a new UN tax convention. Secondly, the panel must increase the scope of its approach to deal with the weaknesses in the current systems so that we can pinpoint the deficiencies there are and solve them. The FACTI panel could make further headway on the necessary reforms to ensure that Article 28 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights is fulfilled. This states that states have to contribute to establishing an international environment to allow for human rights to be established. As the UN Human Rights Committee has stated on its general comment on business and human rights, states parties must take the necessary measures to promote and to establish an environment to ensure that human rights can be upheld. To combat abusive tax practices by transnational companies, states must deepen international fiscal cooperation and to look at how to ensure the appropriate degree of taxation, looking at multinationals as a unit and not as individual companies, as has been stated by the Commission for Tax Reform. There must also be a minimum rate so that we can put an end to the race to the bottom in taxation, which is incompatible with states' human rights obligations, as the Human Rights Committee has stated. Finally, we believe that we need to, as several independent human rights experts of the United Nations have said, the arbitration tribunal regime to resolve disputes between investors and states is an asymmetric system which interferes in states' political headway to protect human rights. They, for instance, undermine tax justice in three ways. Firstly, they deprive states of significant resources as they have to be provided to provide compensation to businesses. They prevent the adoption of progressive taxation, and they restrict fiscal sovereignty because states are afraid of being sued by these big companies. That is why we need to have a genuinely independent, transparent, symmetrical, and responsible dispute resolution mechanism system in which human rights prevail over the desire for profit. We are more than willing to provide more information and documents on these matters to support the panel's work. I thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Now on my list is Mr. Raymond Baker, representative from United States, the founding president of Global Financial Integrity. Please welcome.
Thank you, and good day, ladies and gentlemen. My great thanks to the work of the FACTI panel chairs and members. In my judgment, the interim report does not yet properly or adequately frame the issue with which we are dealing. This basically boils down to a question of terminology. Are we talking about illicit financial flows, or are we talking about illicit finance? The terminology illicit finance is intended to keep the focus on corruption and crime, and particularly that corruption and crime which emanates from emerging market and developing countries. The terminology illicit financial flows, as many of you have used today, makes it clear that we are concerned not only with the origin of illicit funds, but also how they move and where they end up. There's a key difference between these two concepts. The IFF's terminology has been adopted by the UN and by most countries of the world precisely because it is the more encompassing expression. Some have questioned whether or not the terminology illicit financial flows includes tax avoidance. The biggest part of tax avoidance occurs through trade misinvoicing. and most commonly abusive transfer pricing. U.S. laws, the laws of the United States, make it clear that abusive transfer pricing is an offense. Our laws against mail fraud, wire fraud, schemes to defraud, and offenses against property make it very clear that abusive transfer pricing is a criminal offense. The cases, for those who are interested, the court cases Pasquantino, Giorgio, and Bengus refer. This is not yet adequately enforced in the United States, and quite frankly, the reason is because the United States, in particular the outgoing administration, wants to keep the focus of the discussion, to keep the focus of the issue external to this country rather than internal. In our FACTI Africa discussions, Thabo Mbeki, the former president of South Africa and still the chair of the high-level panel on illicit financial flows from Africa, was very articulate on this issue. He commented on the FACTI Interim Report, noting that the panel was effectively saying that it was willing to be guided by the lowest common denominator. He urged instead that the panel must not be driven by countries that don't want to achieve needed progress. In conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, the success of the FACTI panel, in my judgment, rest upon framing the issue around the concept of illicit financial flows, the totality of the issue, where it originates, how it flows, and where it ends up. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Position is clear. But if you saw in our interim report, we also introduced the category of drain of resources, so a little bit wider concept than only IFFE. So, but of course, the final result of our work, we will try to go out from the lowest common denominator. That's our wish from all panel members. Thank you. Now we do have Enrique Prini Esteberco-Rana from Argentina. Welcome.
Hi. Well, good afternoon, good evening to all. First of all, thank you to FARI to allow an Argentinian SME to talk on behalf of the private sector. And taking into account the new normal and the next normal, we think that we have better served to only to have four recommendations in each of the 4 parts of the regional consultation process back in the interim report of September 24th. On the international tax architecture, we think that it would be important to have a clear ranking of countries to which help in the sharing of information. It's not the same that you are in a country with help the international tax community with information, bank accounts, and anything that is necessary to any anti-corruption study or investigation. On the other hand, we highlight that the reducing of the tax pressure on SMEs is paramount. We don't think that taxing will relieve the COVID and the pandemic problems, and clearly more activity on SMEs and the economy will heal all the countries and all the economy. That's why the tax pressure could be reduced, but not changing that to big corporations, because they are the ones who provide work, but trying to limit expending, expending in non-essential things for the community. On anti-corruption and grand corruption, I think that it's paramount to continue living or having the assets of the corruption to be disposed by the court and to be used by the government, stating clearly that this use and these assets are now part of the community, and those are the result of a clear anti-corruption process. Res non verba. We have to show the public that we are seizing the benefits, that this money is not there to pay for the best lawyers, and it's there to be returned to the community that were stolen from. In the issue of addressing enablers, I think that we have focused clearly on DBNBP. I want to highlight that in Latin America, notaries are a species that have to be focused with, because every real estate transaction or big economic transaction are made or instrumented formally through the use of notaries. That's why notaries had to be focused on any investigation, and all the register of the notaries have to be related to be public and be widely public and accessible for any investigation. Finally, on reporting, I think that IFRS number 9 is a key tool to be enhanced and to be widely used by any of the companies in our region, and not only for listed companies, but for SMEs also. Take into account that maybe the cost of its implementation will be high, but at the end of the day, the returns on being using an international standard will be paramount. Okay, taking to that, I think that I'm okay with, and I thank you again for sorry, for FACTI to give us the opportunity to talk about these important issues. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. Peter, do we have anybody? I already exhausted my list.
No, I think we actually timed this very perfectly. It came right in an hour and a half.
Okay.
So if you want to, we have some time to offer to the panel members if they would like to speak.
Yes, all three. If you want to speak shortly as a reaction to the speakers of the region, please welcome. You can start as it was before. If Jose Antonio wants something to say, please.
Well, not really. I welcome some of the comments that I have heard. Particularly, I think for the cluster on taxation, the comments by Mr. Chaparro were particularly important. And we hope to get all the inputs for our further work. But thank you very much. It was very interesting to hear some of the presentation.
Okay, fine. Now, Norma, would you like to add something?
Thank the participants for their input. It's very much appreciated. And I think we panel members would also welcome your inputs, and others who might not have been able to join. You can still send in your written comments to the FACTI Panel Secretariat. It will be very much appreciated, so that we can incorporate those in our report. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. And now, Magdalena.
Sí, muchísimas gracias.
Yes, many thanks again. Many thanks indeed. I once again wish to thank all of the panelists here present today. It was very important to have them together to discuss the clusters that the panel is dealing with. For example, illicit financial flows, tax cooperation, working with the United Nations. It's important that taxation occurs where money is made. We also talked about exchange of tax information, having information on final beneficiaries. We hope that all of these thoughts will be reflected in tangible recommendations that will then appear in our February 2021 report. Thank you.
Okay, fine. Thank you very much. So in that case, I can wrap up the meeting once more, thanking all of you to participate in our consultations with the Americas region. And we welcome your written submissions from all stakeholders until the end of November for our further work. And we will be very thankful if we will receive in addition of what we discussed today. The topics you approached and mentioned are very interesting for us and important, because in each region we finding some differences, because America's region is very diverse, very specific, but some problematic as global approach, the fair and transparent financial system in the world, it's very much the same actuality which we were hearing and receiving from all around the world regions. So once more, I want to thank you all, and Secretariat and interpreters, for our speeding language. We are sorry, sometimes we were forgetting you to slow down, but everything fine, and we were able to understand each other during such a conference. Thank you very much for all who made available for such consultations. And I would like to wish you, for some it is a happy Thanksgiving, for some we are already preparing for happy holiday season and waiting in a month's time for Christmas. So thank you very much and goodbye.